Welcome to week 4 of MPAI 600 here at Georgetown University School of Continuing Studies. So just announcements, Zoom sessions are not this coming week, but next week. I think there's for some reason I got a lot of questions about Zoom session coming, in this coming week. It's not, depending on what group you're in, but the Zoom sessions are this following week. So in week 5 is when they're due. So I'll put that out in the announcements. I just want to make sure that's clear at the beginning. And start thinking about the papers. I've released them for the strategic paper, whether you're writing a paper or doing a presentation. Start thinking about your topics now as you're going through these week 4 readings, so you have it in your head what you want to focus on. So paper 1, the collection strategy overview. I've graded about 60-70% of them. You should be getting yours by the end of this week, early into next week for this session. Just a couple of issues. Again, most people did fine. Most people's writing was fine. I've pointed out any issues if I saw it. But the issues with the collection strategy, again, requirements far too broad for many of you. You wouldn't send an ISR plane out on the border and say, go find bad guys coming across the border. That would be a useless exercise. You would already do your analysis and your background information to narrow down a certain sector of the border, a certain time, so that you can actually catch people illegally crossing the border, if that was what you're focusing on. Think through that example as you go forward, whether you're trying to find out violations on the Iranian nuclear security, or whether you're trying to find out gang activity in El Paso, Texas. Those concepts remain the same. No one says, go find, is there gang activity in El Paso, Texas? That's far too broad. You can't collect on that. A terrorist attack threat in the city. I got one or two about this. Is ISIS a threat or Al Qaeda a threat to my city? This would be much better. Instead of saying, just, is there a threat to a city, or is ISIS trying to recruit my city? Does ISIS use Telegram? Actually, that should be capital Telegram. That's a social media encrypted platform to focus on certain areas. And that helps the collection assets a little bit better going forward. Some of you did policy requirements, not intel. We had a couple of people talk about shootings, and I think just because the Virginia Beach shooting happened this previous week, that might have focused some people's attention. But questions would come up: would my school administrative office or security office be able to stop a school shooting? That's not really an intel requirement. If you're running like a cyber security for your company or your business unit, you wouldn't evaluate your own policies. You wouldn't say, am I doing something to prevent the adversary? You would ask from an adversarial perspective, what tactics is the adversary using to breach my data or breach my networks? So I want to make sure that's clear. You're not putting the policy first. You're putting the intel first and determining if what the policy is to undermine the intel or undermine the threat. And then social media exploitation. A couple of you talked about this. I just want to make sure it's clearer for folks that certain groups or certain targets, you can use open source or social media exploitation. Human smuggling is one. Russian interference in elections or Russian interference in the Baltic states or in Eastern Europe. That's another where social media can be used effectively. Sometimes it's not effective. Obviously, North Korea, you're not going to use social media in a very closed society like North Korea. MS-13, they use actual recruiting or in-person recruiting. They don't use virtual networks for social media. So it's not a catch-all, be-all going forward as an int. So again, that was an overview of paper 1. I should have all the grades back again early next week. So week 3 review. Again, 2 case studies, and these case studies aren't history, or they are history, but it's not to give you a history lesson. But it's to look at those factors and those facets that are still relevant in history And I believe, and you'll see this when we talk about the Russian interference in our election or some of our modern day intelligence failures, that the same pathologies exist back in Pearl Harbor or Yom Kippur War. Despite our advanced technologies and our supposed advanced thinking, we still have some of these same traps going forward. And I hopefully you can learn from this, so it's in your future positions you can organize your information campaigns and intelligence operations a little bit more with more clarity. So Pearl Harbor, this is a classic case study of intelligence failure, and the doll, I think, outlines where the schools of intelligence failure go through, and you're going to ask these questions as we go for our future case studies. So you have the traditional school. This was the Wallstetter article, as some of you articulated, where there's too much information and you can't connect the proverbial dots, that the information's out there, but the analysts can't make sense of it so that you can actually stop the intelligence failure. This comes up with 9/11 a lot, that we had the information that was out there, but the analysts couldn't make sense of it to actually thwart a potential threat. The reformist school is the intelligence organization. And we're going to talk about this next week a lot, but this is the boxes aren't talking to each other. That the intelligence isn't organized so that the right people get the right information to make the right decisions. When we talk about 9/11, to give you a little bit of a preview, we knew the National Security Agency had information about the potential 9/11 hijackers. But because our boxes weren't organized, or government wasn't organized very well, that information from the NSA couldn't get down to the FBI investigators and the people that could actually, and the FAA, and the people that could actually do something about it. So that's kind of the reformist school, is that the organization of government isn't adequate to perform proper intelligence operations. Then there's the contrarian school, which is kind of the opposite of the traditional school, that there isn't enough information collected, or information is not collected at the right points. You could kind of see this in the Pearl Harbor example, where, again, despite all the information we had, there wasn't proper collection on critical asset, the Japanese aircraft carriers. In the Yom Kippur example, there wasn't adequate collection on Egyptian surface-to-air missiles and armor forces, despite the vaunted Israeli intelligence service. So contrarian focuses on the collection piece. The doll, he talks, his focus is on the interface between the intelligence and the policymakers, and he's going to talk about that next week as well. That intelligence has to be tactical in nature and has to have the enough detail so the policymakers can act on it. And he contrasts, I think, very well between Pearl Harbor and Midway, where the Midway there was enough information, enough detail given that Admiral Nimitz could make a decision on that could thwart the Japanese. In Pearl Harbor, there was never that much detailed information. I like Dahl. I like his readings, and I think his readings are very clear. That's why I signed them. But I don't necessarily agree with his thesis here. And the reason being is, rarely will you get enough information, the tactical, specific information that he cites, that a policymaker can make a decision on. In 9/11, you'll never get the, Mohammed Atta will take flight 11 from Boston Airport at 9 o'clock, and you'll hijack the plane at this time. That doesn't happen. For those of you who served in Iraq and Afghanistan, no one ever got intelligence that said there's going to be an IED placed at this location, at this specific road intersection, at this time, by this person. That intelligence rarely exists. What you do get is enough information to reduce risk. And that's the Sharma School. It's not really called the Sharma School. I'm just making that up. This school has been around for a while. It's in all the risk analysis literature. But this is what I think intelligence should be focused on, is giving a commander or a policymaker enough information so they can put reasonable risk reduction measures. Now, what do I mean by this? In 9/11, we're going to talk about this in detail next week. I believe, and again, this is my opinion, there was enough information, the threat of it, that terrorists could use an airline like a Tomahawk missile, which is what they did, that reasonable risk reduction measures could have been taken. Reinforcing the cockpit door, that is not that expensive compared to what we spent afterward. You don't even have to reinforce every cockpit door. You do 30%, and then you have no 9/11-like scenario. Hell, if you go on a plane now, you'll see a drink cart in front of the cockpit, which is standard procedure now on all airlines. If you did that before 9/11, that could have prevented a 9/11-like scenario from happening. And that is putting the drink cart there is a reasonable risk reduction measure. The Pearl Harbor example, again, they could have, Admiral Kimmel could have put long-range patrols out there, or could have been more judicious with his patrols or advanced submarines, or something that could have prevented a Pearl Harbor-like attack from happening. That I think is the key important point. Whether we go back to the IED scenario, again, you're not going to know exact time and place, but usually you can provide enough intelligence that allows you to say, okay, drive slower during these time frames, or don't put your big logistics convoy that's more of a target out at this time. Push the time to this less risky location in time. That's a intelligence driving a reasonable risk reduction measure. And I could talk about this, but I think you kind of get the picture on it that what's reasonable, or what are reasonable risk reduction measures, or how intelligence can drive that. So the Yom Kippur War, again, some of the key points: over-reliance on human. You saw that in the crossing video. Addiction to preconceived notions. This was the concept that said that Israel wouldn't attack Japan, or Egypt wouldn't attack without Syria, and Egypt wouldn't attack without a significant capability to neutralize the Israeli Air Force, either airplanes or surface-to-surface missiles. This was somewhat correct, but not 100% accurate, because Egypt was able to neutralize the Israeli Air Force with surface-to-air missiles. And then lack of intelligence assessment. Israel was looking tank to tank, airplane to airplane. That's their analysis flowed in that direction. They didn't think tank to anti-tank weapon or airplane to surface-to-air missile. That was a key point that the Israelis missed. The other point is that the Israelis thought that the Egyptians would try and retake the entire Sinai Peninsula. And they thought that Egypt wouldn't do anything unless they had the capability to do so. In fact, all Egypt had to do was cross the Suez Canal, and that was enough to put Israel back on its feet and to eliminate the political impasse that Egypt was facing. So, preview of Week 4. I alluded to some of it already, but Week 4, I'm gonna be honest, it's lots and lots of work. This is the most work you'll get any week going forward. But I think the two case studies, 9/11 and the Iraq WMD case study, are pretty important that you have a deep understanding of. So Iraq WMD, 9/11 are the keys. So Iraq WMD, you have the Rachel Maddow documentary. Rachel Maddow is a political person, and I want you to keep that in mind as you read it, that she definitely has a political slant. But the information that she presents is accurate. 60 Minutes curveball, again, another piece of intelligence, how it went so wrong. And then you have the Senate Select Committee on Iraq WMD. The chapter is 200 pages. Don't read 200 pages. Each summary is focused on blue boxes. You'll see that in the reading. Go through the blue boxes so you have an understanding of the intel failure. If there's something that piques your interest, you can go in a little bit more depth there. But I just want you to kind of hit the high points, the blue boxes specifically. And then you have the Sharma lectures on Iraq WMD. So 9/11, you have several documentaries, National Geographic and the Nova NSA documentary. Again, all these documentaries are family friendly, so you can have a family movie night if you want to do that. The readings, the doll, and then the 9/11 Commission, one chapter on that. And again, these readings, we're talking about over 100 pages, so it's about as max as I intend on giving. And then the Sharma lectures on 9/11 and how 9/11 could be prevented. So if there's any questions or issues, let me know, and I look forward to the discussion board.